going to start this week talking about barriers to effective communication. And if we look at the different barriers that are out there, there are several that can creep in and take over. The first one of those is filtering. That refers to senders purposefully manipulating information so that it will be seen more favorably by the receiver. Upward communication, this happens, especially when someone has to deliver bad news. It's often filtered and distorted to avoid the possibility of upper management killing the messenger. So if you can think of a situation where you have to take information and it has to be sent to your boss, or you're the person responsible for telling them, there may be distorted. It's not quite as bad as what you'll try to do, but you're not wanting to deliver that bad news. So that, again, is where you filter that information just because you don't want it to be seen as you're not a team player or you're not covering the company. So a lot of times there will be filtering that's involved. Selective perception. We've talked about this, but receivers in communication process selectively see and hear based on their own needs, their own motivations, experience, background, and other personal characteristics. Human beings don't see reality. They interpret what they see and they call it reality. And you guys may have had situations where this has happened, or where you've seen it, where you and someone else might see a situation, and when you come away from it, you come away with two very different perceptions of what has happened. You can think about that if you've witnessed a wreck, or if you've witnessed something that's happened, that everyone doesn't have the same perception. It will be selective. Information overload. We talked about this last week, that individuals have a finite capacity. It's just so much capacity for processing data in their brains. And when that capacity is exceeded, the result is information overload. And when individuals are in this condition, they tend to pass over, they ignore, they select out, or they forget information, and this results in lost information, less effective communication. And this is, when I talked about it before, it's the fire hydrant type of situation. So much is just, you're trying to drink from a fire hydrant. It's coming at you, but you cannot process it. And I don't know if you guys have been in meetings like that, where it's so much coming at you all at once that you selectively choose what you will and won't hear, but you can easily not, and you filter out information that's important. Emotions. How a person feels when a message is received will influence how he or she interprets it. And when emotions are running high, and by running high, it's anger or stress or anxiety, most people tend to disregard rational and objective thinking processes. So if you're upset, if you're heightened stimulation and you just are not processing the information, maybe you've gotten frustrated or you're angry, those emotions tie into it to where you're not hearing the message and you're not rationally going through the thinking process. Language. Despite sharing a common language, words don't always hold the same meaning among members of an organization. And this is becoming more and more prevalent as the workplace becomes diversified. So what you believe and what you hear and what word you use is not the same, even generationally. I have that situation happen all the time with traditional undergrads. I almost feel like we're speaking two completely different languages, and them not understanding what I'm telling them and me not understanding what they're telling me. So it's just that happening. That can be a barrier of not really being, you may talk the same English language, but again, it may not be, the words may not mean the same. And then communication apprehension. Approximately 5 to 20% of the population is anxious when it comes to where they have to communicate with others. And this apprehension, it affects all forms of communication. It's not just speaking in front of groups that you're dealing with. So let's look at some current issues in communication. and what's going on. And this is based off of Deborah Tannen, that she's identified some general differences that are between men and women, and we will start there. So these are the barriers of communication between women and men. First off, men tend to talk to emphasize their status, while women tend to talk to create connections. And men hear a language of status, power, and independence, where women don't hear that same language. And it's interesting for me, I just recently moved to the School of Adult and Professional Studies. And before that, I worked in the School of Business. And in the School of Business, it's primarily men. And in my office suite, it was entirely made up of men, except for me. And there was an administrative assistant that worked there. And just working in that environment, and I was accustomed. I worked for 15 years in a male-dominated situation, in a male-dominated department, to where you almost take on, to survive, you take on that type of language within itself. So it was difficult for me when I came over to the School of Adult and Professional Studies, because I'm so frank and I'm so honest, and that was hard because people here are nicer, kinder, because it's all women. That's all I work with now are women. So it has been a switch for me to learn almost a new language and a communication process of going from working with all men to working with all women. Because women tend to speak and hear a language of connection and intimacy, while again, men tend to speak a language of status, power, and independence. Men are often more direct and they're more boastful than women in conversation, and women don't do that. Women are very indirect. They try to be kind, and that's especially true in the South, because we have set up women to be nice and kind and more gentle in their approach to communication. Women also apologize more often, and men criticize them for doing so. For men, that is, and I'm sorry is basically an apology. And for women, and I'm sorry is just an expression of understanding and caring about those other people's feelings. So it's very different, especially when you move men and women into the workplace. So you have to think about those communication barriers that can go on, because yes, you're going to have men working in your department, and yes, you're going to have women. So how you communicate with them, it will be different in how you're dealing with them. And then lately we've had a lot of politically correct communication. We do have an increasingly diverse workforce, and we have to be sensitive to how words might offend those within our organization, and everyone in our organization. And we have to eliminate words that convey message, but they have to be clean in the most accurate form. And I will tell you, this has been an area that has been interesting, especially in the last few years, especially the rhetoric that's going on now of what people will tweet, what people will say. I had a situation in my last year that I've dealt with, and it was in an online section, and it moved over into political type of situations, and I had people calling each other names, and this person was a liberal communist, and this person was a conservative jerk, and So that is something that we have to be careful of. We have to have a tolerance. We can have disagreements. We don't have to agree on everything that goes on, but we do have to have a tolerance. We do need to have a kindness, and we do need to be politically correct, not to hurt other people that work within our department and work at our company. And it's just a sensitivity. It just goes back biblically, and you really do need to treat others as you would want to be treated, and have a genuine and a healthy respect for others. Okay, I'm going to stop here now because my next lecture will be on cultural barriers, and we'll talk about that. And with the cultural barriers, I have a little video for you to watch, and it's really interesting. It's in Norwegian, that is talking about nonverbal communication and just his take on that. So that will be available for you guys to watch.